We're back. That's right. Hoist the Colors is back for season two. We're coming off an NIT championship. Hopefully we can make the NCAAs. There you go. Of course, we gotta, show out for the 69th best team in the country, although that team should have been in the NCAA tournament, but it's been 6 months since Selection Sunday. We've both gotten over it. We got some hardware in South Orange now, but again, welcome in to Hoist the Colors season two, the season premiere. I'm Tim Best. He's Pat Madden. It's been quite a interesting off season. You had a lot of nothing to start, and then a lot of development regarding Seton Hall getting guys from the portal, and then a lot of nothingness until a week or two ago when the non-conference schedule dropped, and then the conference schedule just dropped on Thursday, like a week after our non-con dropped. But we'll talk about the schedule at another time. But so let's get right into it, Pat. After all these pieces left from the NIT championship team, losing most notably Kadari Richmond across the river to St. John's, Dre Davis to Ole Miss. Betty Yako graduated and is in the pro ranks now in Europe. Tough pills to swallow, and Alamir Dawes graduated as well. What are your thoughts on how Shaw was able to, pick up the pieces and as well as the rest of his staff to compose the roster that we're going to see now on the court this fall?
I think the good news, if you're Shaheen Holloway, is this is finally the type of team he'd want to put on the court. I think he likes having multiple options at every position. I don't think he was absolutely comfortable playing a 6 or 7 man rotation like he was forced to do his first 2 seasons, in part because of injuries, but in part because he didn't trust a lot of those guys who were sitting on the bench. And you can tell because a bunch of those guys are gone. No more Jaquan Sanders. No more Elijah Hutchins Everett. No more the guy, what was his name? Jaquan
Nganga?
Harris. No more a bunch of guys, no more Audra Azugan. They're all gone. And there's a reason why they're gone is because for whatever reason, they weren't the type of people Holloway saw a future playing on this roster. Because I think if he did, they would have gotten more minutes last season. And I think there would have been, more of an effort to keep some of these guys around. Part of how you build a roster is you look at what you think will work, what you think will fit, and then you try to keep the pieces that you think are, have more of a future here. That's why Isaiah Coleman is still around. That might be part of the reason why David Tubick is still around, because, you might say, well, was Tubick that much better than, let's say, Sanders or Hutchins Everett last season? The answer to that's a debatable point, but I think there's potential. We never saw, let's say, the best of David Tubick last season because Tubick, first, he was a freshman. Secondly, he had on and off injuries last year. So, presumably he's been healthy this off season. Haven't seen a lot of him on the clips the great clips we've seen from the Seton Hall basketball account. But obviously Holloway and the staff see something in him. 6'8" guy, uh, you know, nice athleticism, has a decent jump shot. So, it'll be interesting to see how a guy like Tubeck develops from year one on to year two. And of course, Isaiah Coleman is a guy who he had some awesome games last season. He had one against Monmouth where he put up, I think, 17 points, had a couple of good games during Big East play. We know that guy can score. We know that guy can attack the rim. And his jump shooting was a little bit off, but I think that's something which you can make adjustments to. So Coleman's another guy who I think he excited the fan base at times his freshman year. And I think there's going to be a little more expected of him in his sophomore season. And it'll be interesting to see how he develops as the 2024-25 season takes shape.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, Coleman was a guy that I knew like we needed to have him back on this year's roster. Obviously losing Dawes and Bediako, like those were unavoidable because they were going to be graduating. Kadari kind of figured he was going to leave. If he didn't go across the river, I would have been fine with it, but it hits a little different for him to go across the river to one of our biggest rivals and to Uncle Rick, unfortunately. And Kadari during his time, he cooked St. John's. It's weird. He cooked them, and he's like, you know what? I'm gonna go to the kitchen, and I'm gonna go to the kitchen that I just destroyed cooking in it. But that's just me. It's none of my business. It's his own choice. Whatever. Like Dre Davis going to Ole Miss, I don't blame him. He got himself a bag there, and rightfully so after the heroics that he pulled off in the NIT with a game-winning shot to take down uh, uh, Kareem
Indiana State.
Abdul-Jabbar and Indiana State. I had to make the joke. I'm like, which one do I want to go with? Am I going to go with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Steph Blurry? Which one? I had to make the joke there. I just couldn't not do it. But anyways, Coleman was a guy that I knew priority-wise, you had to have him back. And Sean and his staff, they got it done. It's not like I know that it wasn't a situation where he was in the portal, weighing his options, etc. But for him, for Sean and the staff to make sure that he didn't enter the portal and stuck around, a lot of credit got to give to him and his staff. Dylan Adewusu, I was a little surprised to see return. Not that I dislike him as a player. You and I both know that I like Dylan Adewusu and what he brings to the team. So when he decided to come back, I'm like, well, I wasn't expecting it, but this is a nice little surprise. I'll take it. You got to have a guy like that, especially a tried and true Big East guy who's been through the ringer the last 4 years, and he has the grit and the playing style to back it up. I mean, I could talk about this till I'm blue in the face. I already did it for one whole season of this show. But Tubek was a wild card. He was battling injuries, as you mentioned. His upside is clearly there. And it could take one good offseason for a guy to transform. Look what happened. I mean, granted, you're comparing apples and oranges a little bit because of position, but look at what happened with Romaro Gill. He was clumsy as hell his first year when he transferred to Seton Hall. And then the year after that, he turned into the shot blocking menace that turned into Big East Defensive Player of the Year. And other teams were, and I know that there will be players who played against Rowe who will deny this. They were scared of him and approaching the rim when he was protecting it. As for the rest of the roster, in terms of the guys they got, Zion Harmon, a guy who Seton Hall fans thought they were going to get just a few years ago when he was coming out of high school, took a little bit of time, but hey, my philosophy, better late than never. You look at a guy like Prince Aligbe coming over from Boston College, 6'7" guy. I feel like there's a host of these guys who are in that 6'5" to 6'7", 6'8" range who have that dynamic to them where they can play inside and out, have good jump shots, are very athletic. But they're really Shaheen Holloway guys. And obviously in order to play for Shaheen Holloway, you got to be good on the defensive end. And all the guys he brought in, they're going to bring something to the defensive side of the basketball. I'm not saying that they're going to be holding teams to 50 points a game or something like that, but they're going to bring the defensive intensity and knowing how important it is in a defensive-minded conference to play great defense. Sean and his staff, they executed a game plan like they did last year to build the roster they had that finished fourth in the Big East with 20 regular season wins. I'm not saying that it's an expectation that we're going to do that again this year. Because, I mean, quite frankly, it's unrealistic. But are they capable of doing it? They followed a blueprint, and it worked like that. And they followed the same blueprint in this past offseason. Will it work again? I would love to, but time will tell. So speaking of the transfers, who are your top guys that you were looking at? Like, this is a guy I think can make an immediate impact and rank up there as maybe one of the top transfers in the entire conference.
Well, let's talk about three different guys. And we'll start by the guy who is probably least known to the fan base, and that is the big man. Who where did he come out? That's the sad thing. I can't. I'd have to. The guy, the big guy out of Evansville. You seen to me.
Mm-hmm.
6'10", 215. You're talking one thing that, of course, gets lost when you lose Jaden Bediako is you lose Elijah Evans Hubbard. They lost both of their big men last season. Uh, I presume, I don't, it's hard to say whether Hutchins' effort was sort of guided out the door a little bit, but you come back and this roster doesn't. The three pieces left are Tubeck, Wusu, and Coleman, and none of those guys can play center. So Toomey's a very important guy in terms of the fact that he plays a position that's needed on this roster. But he seems to have a wealth of skills, not unlike Bediako, in terms of his ability to rebound, in terms of his ability to defend on the inside, his ability to score on the inside, and then he has a sneaky good range that people are going to have to take notice of. So Toomey's a guy who I think is someone who, I'm pretty excited that he's going to get a lot of minutes on the front line, and I think he's someone who, definitely has the potential to sort of fill the shoes of Jaden Bediako, and that's not going to be the easiest assignment given what Bediako became on that team last season. And the second guy is a guy who we saw a lot of last season at Providence, Garway Dole, 6'5" guy who a lot of people thought when he got to Providence could have been, for all intents and purposes, a one and done. And the reason was a lot of people thought he had the athleticism and still think he has the athleticism to be a solid pro. I don't know exact. I mean, my sense as to what happened to him in Providence is he got sort of lost in the shuffle of their rotation. They Jaden Pierre emerged, and we'll talk about Providence another time. But guys like Jaden Pierre emerged, guys like Corey Floyd emerged. He sort of got lost in the Devin Carter phenomenon. So when you've got a bunch of decent guys who are being changed in and out, he could never really find his flow at Providence. So the question becomes, will things be better at Seton Hall? Does he have to sort of step up his intensity a little bit? Does he have to be a more consistent scorer than he was? Does he have to be better at handling the ball? I mean, those are things I'm sure that he and Holloway and the rest of the staff have been going over. But if the Garway duel, who got recruited by Providence 2 years ago, shows up in South Orange and at the Rock this season, then he's got the potential to be one of the best players in the Big East. And then there's the guy a lot of Seton Hall fans have low key talked about for years, and that is Scotty Middleton, the transfer out of Ohio State. Middleton's got talent. He's got a ceiling through the roof. He's a guy who can score inside. He's a guy who can score outside. Another guy with tremendous athletic ability, who unfortunately, another guy who sort of got lost in the shuffle when he got recruited by, of all people, Chris Holtmann, your new coach of DePaul. And it's hard to. I mean, everything just went south at Ohio State last season, and some of the carnage of that was that Middleton was never really able to find his groove in the Ohio State rotation. From what I saw when he played very well. But the thing, for whatever reason, Ohio, particularly when Holtmann got fired, his interim coach and the rest of the staff were trying to do everything they could to put the best, to sort of cut the rotation down and not sort of be as interested in developing a guy like Scotty Middleton. So Holloway he recruited Middleton. Uh, the staff knows Middleton pretty well, and I think it's something where maybe when you do feature him, as opposed to let's say not featuring him, you give him a chance to give him some minutes. You give him a chance to do some things offensively. And Middleton's the type of guy on a team who doesn't particularly right now have a guy you would call a go-to guy offensively. Nobody on this roster leaps out at you and is like, okay, this guy's definitely going to score 15 points a game. You don't have a Kadari Richmond who you can, bank on 15 minutes a game like you did last season. You don't even have anybody like a Drake Davis who you count on for putting up 12 or 13 points a game. Somebody's going to have to step up and become a scorer and a go-to guy. And if anybody has the offensive ability to do so based upon his reputation coming out of high school, it's a guy like Scotty Middleton. So I'm excited to see what happens when a guy like Middleton gets on the court. So if you're talking about the three transfers, I was most intrigued with Tumay because there's a hole in the middle, and Tumay's got the most right now to probably fill that. Duel because everyone loved his game getting out of high school, and something went wrong, and it'd be interesting to see if Holloway and his staff can correct that. And then there's Middleton, who Middleton, if the Scotty Middleton from high school shows up with Seton Hall this season, then Middleton's going to cause a lot of trouble for Big East opponents.
So, I mean, if I had, the impromptu list in my mind of the three guys I was most excited about transferring in, um, well, I think we would have had one in common, which is Garway Duwal. But here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give you two transfers and one freshman, and I know you know who I'm gonna say. I'm excited about Felton, man. I mean, there's a reason why when Holloway and his staff landed Felton during his senior year of high school, like I think it was early on in the season when they got him to sign. There's a reason why everyone was so high on him and why everyone was hyping him up, because he's really, really good. And arguably, you can make an argument that he's the best freshman that Shaw has brought in since he took over as Seton Hall head coach, just from a talent perspective and what his star rating and national rank was coming out of high school. I think, and his overall reputation too, because Isaiah Coleman really wasn't that heralded as a freshman last year, and it definitely exceeded expectations. Felton, on the other hand, comes in with expectations because he was that good of a high school player. And for Shaw to land him over some of the other big programs that were going after him, I think that says a lot about Shaw and what he's building in South Orange. So I'm really excited to see what Felton will bring to this team's backcourt. And there's a lot of talent in that backcourt as it is, because they also added, I mean, who knows if we're getting essentially a shell of himself compared to what he was hyped up as coming out of high school, and a guy Seton Hall recruited when he was coming out of high school, Zion Harmon. Um, he knows how to put the ball in the hoop. However, just not as explosive anymore. I mean, you also have the fact that you got to compete with Adewusu and Coleman, who are returning in the backcourt. Garway Duwal, as you mentioned as well. I think Zion Harmon, because of the fact that he had to start at lower levels, I think that's going to add a bit of a chip on his shoulder now that he finally got to where he believes and he knows he should be at, because he's got the talent to make it to this conference. Now it's a matter of, well, you got here. Not only do you have to survive, I think there's an inner drive and expectation within himself to thrive, not just survive. So I think he's going to come in with a chip on his shoulder, thinking that, well, maybe I should have been here a couple of years ago, and I should have been good enough to get here a couple of years ago, but that didn't pan out. So I'm here now, and I'm going to cash in on this opportunity. And then where I'm going with the last guy in terms of a transfer I'm excited about. Get aboard the Gus bus. I'm talking about Gus Yalden. I mean, he's transferring from Wisconsin. He's from the state of Wisconsin as well. I did research. We were talking about him before we started recording. He's from Appleton, Wisconsin, which I believe, if I'm not if correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure that's where Harry Houdini was born. Which is again, I'm a walking, talking Snapple bottle cap. I know the most useless information. Like Harry Houdini was born in Appleton, Wisconsin, and that's where Gus Yalden's from. So I mean, it's weird that that Seton Hall had. I know it's weird to bring this up, but like Seton Hall's a white guy on their team, like for the first time in God knows how long. I'm not trying.
That's not true because Gabriel's the walk on.
Right. Okay.
John Gabriel's been on the team for 2 years,
Right.
so I
Yeah.
don't think that I. So it's not like we. It's. I don't think you've had anybody in as prominent, potentially as prominent a role as Yalden. Uh, let's sort of throw some stuff. And then we talked a little bit in our pre-show about Yalden. He is whatever he looks like aside in terms of his personality. He is night and day from what you would normally expect to see on a Seton Hall roster. Even last year's team, you talk about Richmond, you talk about Davis, you talk about Bediako, even you talk about Wusu a little bit. You talk about guys who, basically did their talking on the court. Richmond, for example, notoriously, they basically they told him do Cook's Corner because we need to see more of just this guy who gets on the court and sort of just is sort of like emotionless. And even Dre Davis, not the type of guy who would, he'd get excited when he make a big play, but Davis was never the type of guy who would sort of like talk trash or brag too much about himself. Even the guy who had the most personality last year was probably Dawes. Dawes was the type of guy who would do all sorts of moves and had his little, he used to, he used to have his sort of signals that he liked the fact that he hit threes and got the crowd fired up. Yalden is entirely different than anything we saw on last year's team. And I guess it's so. I mean, look, if you see the tapes of him in high school, I mean, the guy's got some talent. He's big. He can bang on the boards a little bit. He's got some decent range from the outside. I mean, there's a reason why Wisconsin went all in and recruited him. This question becomes, was the fact that Yalden had so many issues that led to him not seeing the court last year at Wisconsin. Can he recover from that? And if he does, then you really have something go. You have a guy who fans can rally around, a guy who gives you something personality wise that you didn't see on last year's roster. You got a guy for Seton Hall notoriously not notoriously. Seton Hall has historically had, let's say, that one guy who you really wanted to make a big play. Back in the day, 20 years ago, it was a guy named Grant Billemeyer. People went nuts when Billemeyer would hit 2 baskets in a row. You talked about Romaro Gill. Everyone loved the fact that Romaro Gill, who no one had heard of, would block 5 shots into the second row during a game. So Yalden sort of fits that type of, if he scores a dunk on you or he hits a 3-pointer, the building's going to explode. And the question becomes, he probably has more talent than the other big guys on the roster. Tume, we didn't hit upon who was the other guy we didn't hit upon who's the other transfer. I forgot what his name was. Okafor.
Oh, Okorafor, yeah, who's going to
Okafor.
fill a bit of an important,
We didn't we
in
didn't
that
talk
front
about
court.
we didn't talk about Okafor yet coming out of Louisville. I don't know if he got a lot of minutes at Louisville. And then we didn't talk about God's will. the freshman big. So in terms of if you look at the four guys who are sort of power forwards and or classical power forwards and centers on this team, Yalden's got more talent than the other three guys. The question with Yalden is whether or not he's got the mindset and whether he can stay healthy enough to have an impact on this team. Because if he does, the potential, the Seton Hall ceiling goes up if you get anything out of Gus Yalden that's productive. So that's something, but definitely Yalden is a guy who's got a lot of confidence in himself. There was a video, I think, a couple of weeks ago where, right as the school year was starting, they had a sort of like they had a softball game. They basically split the team in two. Half of the guys were playing on one side, half the guys were playing on the other side, and Yalden had a really good time playing softball. You'd have to see.
You think?
We'd have to bring this video up again to watch him. He hits a home run and he says, I could have been a baseball player. I could have been a baseball star. I'm a two-way talent, all that other stuff. So that's the type of thing. That was probably more trash talking in that 1 minute clip than the 13 guys who played on the NIT championship roster last season. So, and that's sort of going to be an interesting element. Maybe Holloway thought, I need some personality on this team. I can't just have a team of sort of, close to the vest, do my talking on the court, not a lot of personalities. Maybe he thinks that Yalden adds an element that might make this team a little more exciting than if he wasn't there. So he's a guy, I think everyone would love to be on the Gus bus. And I guess the good news is that because you also have talented big men on this roster, you will not. It's not as if Yalden sort of disappoints. It's not like this totally derails the team. I think you can get enough out of a Okafor or Tume, or even if God's will does give you a few minutes, you have enough people who have skill on the inside to do what has to be done in terms of making Seton Hall competitive this season.
So, speaking of, on the original, like the team, like the overall recap of that softball game, someone commented asking, at Gus.bus.19 where your dingers at, and Gus, that's a great question. And the tagged photographer named Tim Lang, Tim Lang Photos selling me. And yeah, no, the clip of him talking trash, like I need injected it into my veins. He is so, and not to mention he's like giving like signals like a third base coach in a game, in a softball game that's supposed to be for team building. He's giving signals like he's in Major League, like he's Duke Temple at third base. In Major League. I know you got that reference. I know you did. And you don't think I'm about it, but I am. But I mean, that's another thing. Like, that's why I'm on the Gus bus. Maybe because I'm a huge baseball lover, and I think just him liking baseball, I'm like, oh, I can relate to this guy a little bit more. But yeah, the way in which you heard me talk about Dylan Adewusu, you're gonna hear me talk about Gus Yalden that way, but more so in a personality way. And I hope I can talk about him like that on the basketball court. But, at the time recording, we are still a long way away from the opening tip off, which is Monday, November 4th. And today's September 12th. So you got 18, 14,
7 weeks.
Yeah. You're 7 weeks away, which is kind of nuts to think about, honestly. I said I was about to say today's September 12th. I'm like, no, I can't read a calendar to save my life. But anyways, yeah, we're 7 weeks away, which is crazy to think about again. But last things last, I just want to touch on the schedule real quick. It came out Thursday. The non-conference came out right before that. We kind of knew most of the dates already, but with the conference schedule, Pat, I want to ask you your initial thoughts and any games that stand out to you right off the bat.
Well, the easy one is obviously Saturday, January 18th. Probably going to, who knows if Fox puts it on prime time. or Fox puts it on high noon, it's when St. John's and Kadari Richmond come to town. I mean, you think you could cut the tension with a knife when Seton Hall played St. John's last season, when Patino was coming in and the St. John's fans were acting like that Patino was going to take them to a Final Four. You just ratchet that up 2 or 3 notches because of Kadari Richmond, because of all of the stuff that's gone back and forth. I saw stuff today about St. John's fans and Seton Hall fans going at it about Richmond. A St. John's podcaster uh, posted a clip of Richmond scoring against Butler last season. And then our good friend James Bosworth comes back and says, I hope he doesn't have general soreness when, then there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, I think that Richmond stuff is just bubbling under the surface about how, I think the attitude of Seton Hall fans is, we'll wait this, good luck with what you get with Richmond, because as much as we know how great he can be, we also know that, even last season, he missed 2 big games, which could have been the difference between an NCAA bid and not. So I think we'll see it when we believe it, to see what Richmond does in a St. John's uniform. But, that building's going to be off the wall for that game on January 18th. It's a Saturday, so nobody has an excuse of I'm missing class. All the season ticket holders are going to be there, and the ones who aren't are going to be able to charge whatever they want in terms of a ticket price to get into the building that day. So I think that game might have the potential to be on the same level as the Georgetown Providence game last season. In terms of that. Other than that, we also played Connecticut later in the season. I think the first game of Connecticut is in like early February, and then the last game of Connecticut's in the last week of the season.
The last game of the season, yeah.
It's the last game of the season. It's later than I thought. So, Seton Hall has used wins against Connecticut to build momentum the last 2 seasons in terms of getting the season back on track in 2022-23. And then last year, it allowed Seton Hall to get off to that phenomenal start in the Big East, which allowed Seton Hall to end up in 4th place. This year, when you don't see Connecticut until later into the second half of conference play, something to keep an eye out on is how well is Seton Hall going to be? How well positioned will Seton Hall be going into the first Connecticut game? Is it a situation where they're going to struggle and they need a win to Connecticut to put a happy face on the season, or is it something where Seton Hall is going to be contending for an NCAA bid and getting a win against what should be a top 5 or top 10 Connecticut team puts them over the top in terms of securing an NCAA tournament bid? So I think if you're talking about the 3 games in terms of conference play, which are the most interesting ones, there's the St. John's game, middle of January, and then there's the 2 games with Connecticut that come after that. I think the only really highlight in the non-conference schedule, there's 2 highlights in the non-conference schedule. One is Charleston. In terms of, the Charleston Classic is a traditionally important, and it's probably one of the most watched Thanksgiving multi-team events because it's got the history behind it. People also get excited about it because it starts feast week. Mm-hmm. So even though there's no real, I think the only other major conference team that's going to be in Charleston is Oklahoma State, who ironically we definitely will play them at the Rock 2 weeks after the Charleston Classic is over. So we start with VCU, we might play Nevada, and then I don't know who's on the other end of that bracket. But even though there's a lot of not big names in that, it's important to get a couple of wins in Charleston, particularly because having a couple of losses last year in San Diego, almost ruined the non-conference schedule. And then there's the game December 14th at Rutgers. We play Ace Bailey. We play Dylan Harper. People at Rutgers have these off-the-wall expectations for what's going to happen with them this season. Of course, then I didn't see the publication itself, but somebody pointed out to me that somebody picked them 15th in the Big Ten. So who knows what you get. I mean, one thing you will say for sure about that game is that the rack will be packed. That is probably, if you're talking about games which Rutgers fans want to see for sure, Seton Hall is a game they've circled on their calendar because this is their one chance, and this is their one chance they feel they get to pummel Seton Hall. You know, it's one thing. The last few years, the teams have been pretty closely matched. This year, they think they're that much better than Seton Hall is, and that Seton Hall is just going to be like the lamb going in for the slaughter. And it'll be interesting to see. You know, we'll have to see how Bailey and Harper and the rest of the Rutgers guys play the first month of the season. But then it's also a matter of, this is like 2 years ago, for example, when we won that ugly 45-43 game at the rack. Against Cam Spencer and the rest of those Rutgers guys.
Oh yeah, I almost forgot Cam Spencer was on that team. Wow.
Cam Spencer, Omenuri was on that team. When Seton Hall snuck that one out, that was a game no one expected. Very few people expected Seton Hall to win that game.
Guilty.
And only a few other people thought they would be competitive in that game. So I think there's a similar thing I mean, again, if Bailey and Harper are as good as everyone says they're going to be, then yeah, okay, it could be that's probably something which is looking like a loss. But who knows? And then you give Shaheen Holloway an opportunity to game plan for Harper and Bailey. And then, maybe something will develop them. But, we'll have to see how the first month of the season goes. A lot of it's going to depend on how the rotation plays itself out. A lot of it's going to depend on the potential that we've seen from these guys. A bunch of these guys and a couple of the others we didn't go into detail about this afternoon. We'll see how that develops. It's going to be a wait and see thing. A lot of it's we'll see what happens as they practice over the next 5 or 6 weeks heading into the start of the regular season. We'll get a chance to see how they play the early non-conference games. One sneaky game that a lot of people aren't thrilled about is the trip out to Long Island to play Hofstra. Now, I think part of that, to be honest, is because I think Shaw wanted to play Speedy Claxton, the coach of Hofstra, a guy who had several years in the pros, a guy who's sort of like a legend on the courts, and a guy who's done a pretty good job as Hofstra coach.
Yeah.
They finished in the top 5 in the Coastal Conference, the Coastal Athletic Association, which is, that's a very good mid-major conference. So that's going to be an interesting matchup about a week into the season when Seton Hall goes out to Long Island. I don't know if there's going to be a big crowd at that game, but in terms of the fact that Hofstra is going to be up for it because they get to play a big guy. They get to play a big opponent, closer to home, and hopefully Seton Hall will be up for it because you don't want to take a team like Hofstra lightly, and you definitely don't want to lose a game to a team like Hofstra. So that's going to be an interesting measuring stick very early in the process, right before they head on to Charleston.
I agree. I actually will agree with you on the Hofstra matchup. And right before that, this is another weird, intriguing matchup. We're playing Fordham at Walsh. And Fordham's A10, and A10, as you know, one of the more underrated conferences in the country. I mean, it's a top 10 conference in terms of like what are the best conferences below the Power 4. It's really still a Power 5 because the Big East is a power conference in basketball. If you want to fight me over that, catch these hands. Anyways, but outside of the Power 4, like it's the Big East, the Mountain West, maybe the AAC, but the A10 is in that next group of conferences. And Fordham, I know they're lower on the totem pole, but you're still playing an A10 team at Walsh. It's going to be an interesting but fun dynamic. I mean, look what happened when the last time we played an A10 team in Walsh, which was St. Joe's in the first round of the NIT. Granted, again, comparing apples and oranges, but it should be a fun atmosphere and one that'll be definitely tough for the Rams to play in. I wanted to shout out Trey Morton, the son of son of Tiny Morton, and also a guy I graduated with from Seton Hall. He was a manager there and has since moved on to be on the staff for Fordham. So I want to wish nothing but luck to him and his staff when that game comes. Hofstra at Nassau is interesting because they're not playing at UBS. It's at the old bar, Nassau Coliseum, where the Islanders won their 4 Stanley Cups. Had to plug some hockey in there somewhere, right? But speaking of Charleston, I want to. I'm looking at the bracket now. So in each of the 4 matchups, there's one team from the Power 4 in each of them. Well, hold on. Let me get that right. Okay, Miami, ACC, Oklahoma State, Big 12, and then on our side, we will face Nevada or Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt, I wonder what they're going to look like in their first year post Jerry Stackhouse, because that, for the most part, was a train wreck in Nashville. So, I mean, who knows? What's going to be the better draw in terms of what will it do? What will be more impactful for the resume? Probably Nevada, as weird as it sounds, but that's just my 2 cents. As for the conference schedule, you touched on St. John's. We don't play UConn until our 14th conference game of the season. Like, that's 70. We play 65% of our schedule before we even get to UConn, which is crazy thing. And you brought and great point you made about what the UConn game has done the last couple of years for Seton Hall as a momentum booster to get things back on track. In Shaw's first year, last year, a statement making win to start conference play that they rode the momentum of to start the way that they did in Big East play, winning 6 of their first 7. So, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and that's actually a very good point. I think that's something that I haven't heard at all, and something that really should be brought to the forefront. And you're 1,000% right. Now, what other things intrigue me? We start conference play at Nova at the Finn for the first time, and we're not counting the COVID season. We're going to make that very clear. This is the first time they're playing at Nova in the Finn with fans in attendance since MLK Day, my junior year at Seton Hall in 2017, which, by the way, was the final year the Big East did the marathon where they had 5 games all in a row on FS1. RIP. If we get back to an even number of teams, Val, for the love of God, bring back the marathon. If we get another team or lose a team for God knows why. If we have an even number of teams again, bring back the marathon, please. Anyways, so yeah, we play at Nova on their campus for the first time with fans since 2017. I think it's a punk move. We're playing St. John's at Carnesecca on a Saturday, no less. And they're playing Xavier at the Garden. Get out of here. Like, stop that. Like, I get that Xavier has more traction right now. They look like they're supposed to be ranking higher in the Big East, according to a lot of the pollsters, pundits, what have you. But you mean to tell me that you think you're going to get a bigger crowd for Xavier than you would for Seton Hall, especially on a Saturday? Come on. Let's be real. Come on. And that's the second to last road game they play. And then after that, in that sandwich, they have at St. John's and at UConn the last, 2 road games. In between, they host Creighton on Senior Day. That is an interesting thing because I feel like Creighton's usually an early matchup in the season. I think the latest we've seen them is like in the last 5 years is like mid-February. So
we played them in Omaha at the end of 2021-22. I
And
believe.
and 2 years before that in 2020.
Right, but we played them in Omaha. I mean, yeah, I don't know if we played them in Newark late in the season, but we
Mm-hmm.
definitely played them in Omaha late in the season.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
The win in Omaha was all but clinched an NCAA tournament bid for that team. Of course, the 2020 was we won't get the less we say about that game in 2020, the better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and people talked about it when it came out on Thursday about how is Seton Hall done wrong getting all these tough games late in the schedule? Well, first of all, you play everybody twice. The beauty of the Big East is you play everybody twice.
Yep.
For every we have to as much as we play Connecticut late twice in the season, I think by the time we play Connecticut, we will already get the 2 games with Georgetown and the 2 games with DePaul
Mm-hmm.
before that. So that's probably why it's important maybe to load up. You talk about 13 games, 13 conference games before UConn. You might need to be 9-4 or 10-3 before you get to that UConn game, so that the rest of that schedule doesn't, sink the season. You walk into that UConn game 7-6 and 6-7, you're staring at maybe finishing conference play like 8-12, and 8-12. Unless we run the table and even beat Rutgers at Rutgers, 8-12 is not going to be good enough to make the NCAA tournament. So in that sense, if you're looking at ending the season over 500, you're going to have to walk into that UConn game off to a pretty good, the first UConn game off to a pretty good start, because those 7 games, people might be thrilled walking out of those last 7 games with a 3-4 record, given you play UConn twice, given you go to St. John's, given you get Creighton and High. I think there's a Marquette game in the mix there too. And you can never really trust what to expect when you play top 20. I mean, because I think nobody doubts Connecticut's going to be a top 10 team. I think Creighton's going to be a lot better than people might be thinking right now. Marquette's going to be good. So in that sense, if you're playing the 3 best teams going into the season, the Big East, late in the schedule, you better have a lot of wins stored away, because you cannot count on winning any of those games.
Yeah, I agree. And, to play devil's advocate in terms of, you talk about the non-conference schedule and, even if you steal Rutgers, you got to be in a certain spot. Like I know the non-conference schedule is like much to be desired, but here's the thing. They only did this because of the precedent that last year's inept selection committee, the dangerous precedent that they set because of all these bogus teams getting in because of a weak ass non-conference schedule that they played, because it upped their net ranking. Like clearly they valued the net. It wasn't an evaluation tool. It was what they used to determine who got in. Like they were dependent on it. So what Shaw's just doing what the committee valued come selection Sunday. Like you can't fault him. I don't blame him. Like if anything, I hate to admit it. I know it's not sexy because the non-conference schedule is kind of blech, but let's be real. You string together several blowout wins. You play competitively at a Rutgers. You get 1 or 2 Power 4 wins, which include Oklahoma State if you get them at home, which I expect them to. And then you go 2-1 in Charleston. Like you're realistically probably 9-2. And if you win the games you're supposed to win and you blow teams out, that's going to boost your net ranking. And the committee, again, last year, they set a dangerous precedent. They value the net a lot more. They're dependent on it rather than it being just a simple evaluation tool instead of, scoping out the entire body of work, which they should have done. If they did that, Seton Hall would have been in the tournament. And that's not an opinion either. That is a fact. All right? Like, to me, I know that it's not a great thing to do because it makes you look weak. But here's the thing: it's kind of a necessary evil in order to make the tournament. Because again, you bump your net ranking up by blowing teams out because the larger your margin of victory, the more your net ranking goes up because that's what the net values and that's what the committee valued in last year's tournament. And most likely, if that's the day president that's been set, they're going to do it again next year and the year after that, so on and so forth. So listen, like, if let's be real, they're setting, this is a chessboard. Like, Shaw has to play chess, and if he's playing checkers, it's not going to work. He's got to play chess. He's got to play the game. To quote the meme of that one guy, Big Mark or whatever his name is, singing Triple H's theme, like, time to play the game. Like, you have to have seen that, but like, Shaw's playing the game. Like, if that's what you got to do to make the tournament, so be it. So, and speaking of the game, we're all about to play it in 49 days. So Pat, any closing thoughts before we wrap up the season premiere?
No, I think at this point, I do, it'll be interesting to see how people's feel about things as the season sort of ramps up. We'll obviously get to see the players more, when we get practices and we get people sort of to watch practices. I really would have I really think something that Seton Hall probably should do, which I'm seeing a lot of other schools in the Big East doing, is to have more open practices. Uh, I do think, like, for example, Marquette does a big open practice thing. Connecticut did a big open practice thing in August, for crying out loud. Uh, and I know St. John's is Villanova does a big Villanova does a big thing. Providence does a big thing. I think that I think that the Seton Hall staff needs to showcase this team more. I get what Holloway says, that he's got a lot of work to do to get the team ready to function for the opening of the season. But I do think that you need to show it, because one of the things that is just weird about this year as opposed to other years is Parents' Day weekend. They would normally hold an open practice, but Parents' Day at Seton Hall is the weekend before the season starts.
Yeah, that's
And
right. Mm-hmm.
and I think the last thing that you want is to have that type of circus-like atmosphere when you're getting ready for the regular season to start. Whereas if you put something on the calendar a couple of weeks before, then I don't know if you want to call it Midnight Madness. I don't know if you whatever you want to call it. You do something to get people into the building to basically see what you've got. If you want to charge people $20 and put the money in the NIL, go right ahead. But it's the principle that I think that, whereas you're going to have Providence fans excited because they do a big scrimmage, I think 3 weeks before the season. Villanova does something the first week in October. Marquette does a big thing, I think, 2 or 3 weeks before the season starts. So all of these fan bases are going to be able to see their team and sort of see things that get people excited about stuff. I think Shaheen Holloway, Brian Felt, and the rest of the brain trust over at Seton Hall need to do something to get the general public at least interacting with this team. Because one thing we learned from the NIT last season that sort of went under the radar was that the fans want to connect with the players. You sort of, the players would, hang around Walsh after the game, the NIT games last season. They want to have a connection to these guys, particularly the people who, let's say, are the longtime season ticket holders. They really want to connect with these players, sort of, just take a picture with them, shake a hand, whatever the story is. And I think that's something which, that probably would would probably give the fans that much more incentive to get excited about this season if you did something a couple weeks before the season started. And that way I think that could get the fan base more fired. And there's no reason not to do that. And no reason not to make it a big deal the way it's done on other Big East campuses. So that would be my last. That's I'm going to go on a soapbox here and say sometime over the next month, figure out a way to get the team on the court. Even if you're just doing drills, or you're doing a 10-minute scrimmage, anything just to get fans in Walsh to see the team and maybe make some connections between the real diehard fans and the roster.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, it is kind of weird that they're doing the parent/alumni weekend so late into the fall. I mean, November 2nd is when they're doing the brunt of it. And November 2nd is the day where one of my best friends from Seton Hall and one of my Sign Mafia brothers, Tom, he's getting married on campus as all of this madness will be going on. I know he didn't plan for that to happen, but it's kind of a cool, fun coincidence that this is happening amidst all of the Parents Weekend festivities. So it'd be cool to see a lot of people on campus. In the same token, though, parking's going to be a bitch, and I'm not looking forward to that one bit. But I digress, as Taz would like to say on commentary in AEW and even when he was in WWE. But that's beside the point. But yeah, just a lot to look forward to. I mean, we got 7 more weeks until we tip off against St. Peter's on November 4th. We're probably going to find a way to get 1 or 2 more episodes in before the season tips off. Big East Media Day is a month away. It'll be on October 23rd at the Garden. I'm going to try to go, although my schedule is pretty freaking hectic as around that time, because I'm supposed to be going with my family to Virginia the day after that for a wedding I'll be officiating for my brother's best man. I feel like I'm making this way too much about myself, and I feel guilty for doing that. But I think that should be my point. All right, Tim, shut up and end the episode. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So that's going to do it for season 2 premiere of Hoist the Colors. Stay tuned for updates from Pat and I about when our next episode will be, and if hopefully both of us will be in the Garden for Big East Media Day again on October 23rd. So thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we'll see you next time. So until our next episode, and I can't believe I almost forgot to did it and I almost botched it, but until next time, I'm Titonia. Take care, y'all.